Welcome to 5 Minute Bible, your daily guide for your daily reading. Today's May the 19th, and we'll be looking at 2 Samuel 19 through 21. Now today we move into the difficult aftermath of Absalom's rebellion. The war is over, but the kingdom remains wounded and unstable. And 2 Samuel 19 through 21 records David's return to the city, lingering political tensions, another rebellion, covenant justice connected to Saul's past sins, and military conflict with the Philistines. And these chapters show that while God preserves David's kingdom, the consequences of his sin and division do not disappear quickly. And in that way, chapter 19 begins with David overwhelmed with grief over Absalom's death. His mourning becomes so consuming that Joab rebukes him, warning that his sorrow is discouraging the very people who risked their lives to save him. David regains his composure and returns to Jerusalem as the tribes debate his restoration to the throne. Along the way, several key encounters occur. Shimei, who previously cursed David, now seeks mercy. Mephibosheth explains that Ziba deceived David during the rebellion. Barzillai, who loyally supported David during his exile, is honored by the king, and yet beneath these interactions, tribal tensions continue to simmer. Chapter 20 records another rebellion led by Sheba, a Benjamite, who attempts to divide the kingdom again. Though the rebellion is eventually crushed, the instability reveals how fragile national unity in Israel had become. In chapter 21, a famine strikes the land because of Saul's earlier violation of Israel's covenant with the Gibeonites. Justice is carried out, and the famine ends, and the chapter concludes with victories over Philistine giants, reminding us that the battle which marked David's rise still continues within the kingdom. So as you read today, I want you to ask the following question. What does restoration look like after rebellion and division and covenant failure? These chapters show that God preserves his kingdom, but restoration in a fallen world is often slow and painful and incomplete. And in that way, the central pattern in these chapters is the tension between restoration and lingering fracture. David returns to the throne, but the kingdom isn't fully healed. Trust has been damaged, loyalty remains divided, and the rebellion may be over militarily, but relationally and politically, the wounds have remained open. Another major pattern also surfaces in these chapters, which is covenant accountability. The famine in chapter 21 reveals that Saul's violation of the covenant with the Gibeonites still carries consequences years later, even after Saul is dead. God takes covenant promises seriously even when human beings forget about them. Sin, in that way, does not simply evaporate over time, but it always comes to account. Yet alongside all of this instability, God continues preserving the Davidic kingdom. Rebellions are subdued, enemies are defeated, and David's throne remains standing despite the chaos that is surrounding it. This presses also into our life today as well, because forgiveness and restoration are real, but sin often leaves painful consequences that unfold across relationships and in families and even over generations, even after the sin has been forgiven and reconciliation has occurred. Healing frequently takes longer than we wish, and the consequences often linger longer than we would hope. And yet, even in the middle of all of our fractured circumstances, God remains faithful to sustain his purposes. And in that way, these chapters intensify the longing for a greater king who can bring the true and lasting peace that only God can bring. David restores the kingdom partially, but division and instability continue surfacing repeatedly. And in that way, human leadership, even at its best, cannot fully heal the brokenness that is caused by sin. But Christ, however, comes as the greater Son of David who reconciles what rebellion has fractured. Where David struggles to unify the divided tribes, Christ will create one people from every nation through his own blood. Where David's kingdom remains vulnerable to repeated uprisings, Christ establishes an unshakable kingdom that cannot ultimately be divided or overthrown or fail. The covenant justice in chapter 21 also points forward to the cross because sin demands justice. Covenant matters before God, yet ultimately Christ himself bears covenant judgment on behalf of his people so that reconciliation and blessing may come fully and finally through him. And unlike David's kingdom, which remains scarred by conflict, Christ's reign steadily moves history towards complete restoration, where righteousness and peace and covenant faithfulness will fill the earth permanently and forever. So as you read 2 Samuel 19 through 21 today, I want you to notice how difficult and imperfect the restoration can be after rebellion and sin. And tomorrow, we're going to return to the Psalms and hear the weary cries of a king clinging to God in the midst of exhaustion, grief, and longing. And with that, read your Bible carefully, devotionally, and joyfully, and may the Lord use his word to sanctify you completely, and we will continue our journey tomorrow. God bless you.